Those who have photographed during the film era must have a tons of slides and negatives in their archives. And if you have never digitized them, then you might want to watch this video, because what's the better time to digitize your slides and negatives than now? Because most of us have a lot of free time in our hands because of the situation with the virus all over the world. So if you have never digitized your slides or negatives, this video might be for you. Hi there, I'm Peter Forsgard, an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And before we get into the digitizing your slides, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the bell so you get notified when there is a new video online. My channel is all about you getting to be a better photographer and of course about Olympus gear. Many years the traditional way was using a scanner, either a flatbed scanner or a film scanner, a dedicated film scanner. Flatbed scanners were really handy because you could do prints and slides on that. And also if you had, what I have also here are the bigger slides, 6x7, then it wasn't possible to have a film scanner. Of course it was, but those film scanners were really, really expensive. And that's why I used to do all my scanning with a flatbed scanner. I had a so-called top with where I could scan slides also and also prints. Mostly I used it for slides. And I also have a Minolta Dimage, a dedicated film scanner which I used for the 35mm film scans, both negatives and slides. But there is actually a better way nowadays using a digital camera, because digital cameras can focus really close if you have proper lenses, extension tubes and stuff like that. And it's actually really easy to do without getting a big amount of new gear. Let me show you how. In this video I use Olympus camera because I have Olympus cameras, but these instructions work on any digital camera. It doesn't matter if you have DSLR, you have a mirrorless camera. These instructions work even with a phone. But of course with a phone it's a bit harder to do, but it can be done. But the best results you get if you have a proper camera, either DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Some other things that will help you to do this is, of course, what I first said is a good lens that you can focus really close, either a macro lens or some other ways of doing macro, like extension tubes, for example. Then you need some sort of a light source, artificial light, which I recommend because outdoors the light keeps constantly changing and it's not the perfect thing. But you could use window light and photograph against the window. If the sun is not shining straight at the window, then you could use that. But the best way is to use artificial light. And what I have is a Falcon Eyes F7 LED light, and this has a diffuser in front, so it will be diffused. Because if I used it like this, where you could see all the individual LED lights, it would be, well, it wouldn't look good. You would see the lights. But we'll talk about the light and how to place it a bit later in this video. And in many cases you also need a tripod. But you could do this also handheld, but it's a really, really hard way of doing it because the distance is quite close, and in macro a small movement of a camera will make the image unsharp and the focusing won't be where it is. But if you use continuous autofocus and you have a very steady hand, you could do this without a tripod. But I really recommend using a tripod. It's a lot easier to do and the results will be better. There are several methods of actually copying the slides. It's a good thing to have the slides in a slide frame. It makes it a lot easier so that you can get the slide to be totally flat. If it's a curve like films usually are, like these negatives, they are a bit curved, you won't get a sharp image and the quality won't be really that good. And then another thing is that if you have negatives, then if you have some kind of a negative holder for them, it helps. But of course you can use some normal tape and just, tape them to a piece of glass or something like that. Just remember that the glass has to be really clean. And then how to position the light. It doesn't matter which way you do it. If you photograph it from up till down and have the camera on a tripod with the macro lens, have the light behind the slide, under or like this, what I have here behind it. What I have here is a Kaiser slide copier, which is attached to my 45mm 1.2 lens. The slide copier has a lens inside, which I took out because I could get better results without the lens inside, because the lens that it has wasn't very good quality and the edges were really soft. This way I could get a lot sharper image. And I have the light behind here, and the reason that I'm having the light a bit further away from the copier is that so that if there's any texture in the light, if I would stick the slide right next to the that's an image of me, you know, like this, then it would be possible that you can see the texture. You can use, for example, an iPad also as a light source behind the slides, but then you need to lift the slide a bit off the screen, because if you photograph so that you can see the screen, then the problem is that you will see the mesh of the screen. Cleaning up that is almost impossible, so don't do that. So if you have an iPad or any other tablet, your light source, then use something to raise up the slide from the iPad. And if you use iPad, then it's really a good thing to block any light that spills around the slide, because if you get some light into the lens from the iPad, then you will lose some image quality. So cutting two pieces of cardboard like this, then you can actually make a nice lens hood and block the light that's not necessary, so that the light is only coming through the slide or the negative. And then when you have all set up and you figure out the best way to copy your slides or negatives, then we need to talk about the camera settings. And I would recommend stopping down stop or two to get a bit more depth of field and also to get a bit better image quality, because almost every lens in the world is a bit better if you stop it down. So especially if you have a tripod or you have one of these slide copiers, it's a lot easier to have long shutter speeds, because the camera doesn't move compared to this, because the slide stays in the same place even though I'm moving this. So we can have longer shutter speeds. And then also slides are really contrasty, because that's the way they were. You could not have the same dynamic range on the slides that you can have nowadays on digital cameras. And that's why you need to use the base ISO of your camera to get the most dynamic range that your camera can capture. And that's why I don't recommend using the extended ISOs, I mean the low ISO, because they usually tend to make the image a bit more contrasty, and you will get some contrasty images anyways when you're copying slides. And the white balance can be automatic, or if you know the white balance of your light, then set it manually to the same amount. And then when you take a few test shots and check out them in computer and see if the colors are about right, then just use that. You can, with this system, you can use manual focus or autofocus. It doesn't matter. Manual focus is really handy if you have focus peaking and magnification on your screen, then you can actually see a lot better. But automatic goes totally well if you have some contrasty scenes, which you most likely will have in your slides. And then it makes it a lot faster. But before we continue, let's look at some images that I've copied from my trip in the States in the 1980s. And you can also try HDR if you have a really contrasty scene in your slide. That could help. At least Olympus cameras can do HDR images in camera so that they can record separate images and also make the HDR as a both JPEG and RAW image. So if you have set RAW image, which I of course recommend, then it will make a JPEG and a HDR RAW image in camera, and that could be handy for post-production. And then of course, with Olympus cameras, you can use high-res shot. You will get 80 megapixel images if you use the tripod high-res shot versus 20 megapixel images. And making the image a bit bigger is a wise thing, because then when you make it smaller, it will get a little sharper. Because as I noticed when I was doing this, that these slides, even though they look sharp, they are really soft compared to the images that we see now with digital cameras. They weren't that sharp, even though they were totally perfect at the time when these slides were taking, like mine are taking in the early 80s. So it's been a long way to go from those almost sharp images all the way to the modern digital cameras, which are over sharp in my opinion. And if you don't have one of these slide copiers and cannot get one, you can actually make one from a paper roll. I have, this is a household paper roll, which is a bit bigger than a toilet paper roll, which you might have some extra toilet paper rolls right now, but this one is big enough for slides. What you do is just cut it to be a perfect length, and then you can actually hold it with your hand. It's not that handy, but it's a good way if you don't have this tube. It's because, you know, photography is all about do-it-yourself things, and those work perfectly fine because the only thing that matters is the end result. This might be a bit faster and easier way, but there are lots and lots of different ways to copy your slides. And then there's one thing that I did not mention yet is about the photography. It could be a wise thing to do tethered shooting, so that you can send your slide or not the slide, but the file straight to your computer. And about image editing, the biggest part in image editing when you're copying slides is getting rid of the dust. So if you have a possibility to clean your slides really well before you make the image, it makes it a lot easier for you in the post, because cleaning up the images it's a pain. I've talked mostly about slides, but copying negatives is exactly the same method. You do the same thing when the copying, but then the biggest difference is editing, because especially if you have color negatives, the base color on the negative is kind of like an orange yellow tint, and inverting them in post doesn't work. You need to do some special things. I am working on a video how to do that in Olympus Workspace and Lightroom, and if the video is already published, you can watch it from here. But I hope this video was helpful for you. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.